This Zero Now program is brought to you with the support of our founding partners.
Let me introduce our panelists. First, Christine E.B. Howard, welcome. Chris, mind just giving us a quick background and your connection with the topic today?
Hi, Christine E.B. Howard, founder, CEO, VB Howard Consulting. I have 20 plus years of project and program evaluation experience. I've evaluated federally funded and state funded projects and programs specifically around school violence prevention, character education, anything surrounding the implementation and use of innovation technology to help with the school violence prevention. So I'm Christine.
All right, Christine. Awesome. So glad you could join us. Danielle Myers. Welcome, Danielle. Just quickly introducing yourself.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me, Ara. Danielle Myers, lead evangelist here at Status Solutions. I've been here for about 15 years in various capacities, but all rooted in how we can leave the situation better than we found it. And as kind of an industry leader in situational awareness, as well as a mom of 3, I have kind of a unique background and, kind of multifaceted with looking at this from the industry perspective, but also as a parent. So excited to be a part of our conversation today. Could not echo the funding challenge more. And we know that we have to have kind of a collaborative approach to funding. So excited to be a part of this discussion today. Thanks.
Awesome. Looking to diving into that. And Lynette, welcome, Lynette Chambliss. Welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you, Ara. Thank you for inviting the COPS office today. My name is Lynette Chambliss. I work in program development at the COPS office. Our school safety program, some of you may be familiar with, is the school violence prevention program. It's been in effect since 2018 and is funded through the STOP Act. And we also receive additional funding through the bipartisan Safer Communities Act. So my primary focus at the COPS office is school safety at this point. I do consider our program my baby, if you will. So thank you for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to the discussion as well.
That's right, Lynette. I'm looking forward to it. You've been there since the beginning of the program, so would love to learn more about that as we continue the conversation. I just want to remind our participants, if you have a question for Christine, Lynette, or Danielle, there's a Q&A button right in the middle of your screen there. Just go ahead and click the Q&A button. We'll get to that during the program. We have a bunch of questions that came in beforehand as well, but we'll start with the first question for you, and let's take a look at the results here. Okay, let's see. Believe your administration receives. Okay, so it looks like most folks that are school-related, education-related, don't believe they have enough information or maybe not enough information, so that's interesting. And then as far as the majority of funding, federal grants, state and local government grants, okay, that is interesting. So we'll talk about that. In fact, Danielle, that first question, as far as receiving information about available funding, are you surprised by that?
I'm not surprised. No. And that's the purpose of having these types of discussions, right? Because we have to get together as a group and understand best practices and where we can get that information and what our resources are to begin with, from a federal perspective, from a state perspective, and also from our local communities. So not surprised by that, Ara.
And Lynette, from your perspective, I mean, since you've been doing this especially the school violence prevention program for a while, what do you think the issue is as far as educating administrators, school boards, superintendents, school safety directors on the availability of funding programs, federal funding programs at least?
Well, I think sometimes the federal government just seems so large and overwhelming to at least a lot of people that I talk to and meet. So there's a concern about where to start. So our office, we're a smaller office under DOJ, but we do a lot of outreach. I can't speak for other offices, but I think it's just not knowing where to start. And hopefully, today I can help with that. Everyone else can help with that, give some guidance to where to begin on receiving funding. Department of Justice has funding. Department of Ed has funding. Homeland Security, sometimes you may not consider FEMA, they have various programs. So it's just knowing where to start when it's, kind of this huge umbrella as the federal government makes it a little bit more complicated, I would say.
And I think you're absolutely right. And I think knowing where to start is even a bigger issue when it comes to administrators, because you look at the background of most superintendents or school board directors, their background is not in safety and security. And so you put this on their plate, it's just overwhelming. And I speak from experience. And Chris knows my brother's superintendent. I mention this every single month. I seem to mention this, but tie it back to him. He's not a security safety professional, so it's just completely out there when it comes to knowing where to start, and that's really part of the reason why we created that Path to Safer Schools. Okay, start here. Start with the safety team. Start with people that know about this and people that understand where funding is available. And funding comes from assessing vulnerabilities. Chris, from your perspective, I mean, with when it comes to being aware of what funding is available, what is your perspective on that? How do school districts, superintendents, those that might be responsible for that, learn about what's available?
So there's a couple of different avenues I would recommend. First, get on listservs. Grants.gov, there's a listserv for there. And then go to department agencies like Department of Education, Department of Justice, get on their listservs and just pay attention to what's coming out at the federal level. Then I would replicate that same listserv, like subscribing and getting on newsletters. I would go to your state and local government and go that way. If we're talking about just the government grant space, that would be my first recommendation of just when funding opportunities are going to come out, you're going to know about them when everybody else knows about them. The second thing I would recommend is if you've received grant funding in the past and you have a good rapport, or maybe you don't have one, now's the time to make a good rapport with the program officer and make friends with them, to ask them about what's coming through their agency, what's coming through the pipeline. Are there other resources? It's okay to ask questions, ask about other potential funding opportunities and funding lines that are coming through, and just pay attention to what's coming out in those newsletters.
And also, I'd also add for example, in the Zero Now community, that Path to Safer Schools, we're posting available grants in there as well. But yes, absolutely, Lifter is great. One of the things, as far as and I've heard this from different folks, but Lynette, correct me if I'm wrong, but the exact date for the opening of like the SVPP grant and other grants are incumbent upon Congress adopting a budget. Is that true? Does that kind of make it a moving target?
Yeah, so some federal agencies have revolving budgets, I guess, so they can operate throughout the year. We typically receive our funding in the early spring, late winter. So around this time, I think we opened in April this year. So that's about constant for us. I saw a question. We're closing SVPP on June 17th. So we're kind of a late spring, early summer program. But I do want to echo Christine, grants.gov is your absolute starting point. That's where I direct a lot of people who I speak with that we may not have what they need, and that'll tell you where everything is. And you'll know some bigger agencies like FEMA, Department of Ed, they have year-long programs that you can take advantage of across all kinds of topics. So for example, our program focuses on the physical security of the schools, but Department of Ed, you can obviously, tap into mental health resources, cyberbullying, things like that. And those would run all year long, not just when you're out for the summer. You can take advantage of their services any time of the year. But yeah, our funding tends to be dependent on when Congress gives it to us, even though we expect it every year.
I want to add to that and say, every agency is a little bit different. as far as how their dollars come through appropriations. But on this, once you get past grants.gov and you're looking at agencies that specifically align with what you're trying to accomplish, for example, Department of Education or Department of Justice, consider other agencies that on the surface may not look like a fit for you. For example, the Department of Defense. There's a whole subdivision within DoD. They have a whole education line. And, consider funding opportunities coming out of DoD. Also, Department of Health and Human Services. I would say on the surface, if it doesn't look like it's a fit, don't completely rule it out. There may be specific funding opportunities that an agency is looking to fill a gap, or they recognize there's a need. I point to USDA. They have a rural education component out of the USDA, and you would think that would be part of the Department of Education. But, keep agencies in mind, don't rule them out. Of course, you want to make sure that you're eligible to apply for a specific funding opportunity as well. But, get on the listservs and what Lynette said, just get in there and start reading through things and get on the listservs.
I just want to add to that, when you were naming agencies and that you may not think of, Secret Service has events that you can sign up for, free webinars. I try to take as many as I can just so that I kind of understand outside of the federal, viewpoint. Secret Service, they have other resources that are free that may help you, put your plans together, put your applications together so that when you're applying to us, we see a comprehensive plan. We see something that's attainable. So, Secret Service is definitely a wonderful resource for reports on threat assessments, behavioral assessments, it's just a wealth that is free for you to access. So.
Exactly. And what's incredible is, we always talk about this whole journey, and this is great. I'm already learning stuff today that I didn't know about 30 minutes ago. So this is excellent. But next month, we're talking about prevention programs. You mentioned, Lynette, behavioral threat assessment programs and Secret Service, and they operate the Behavioral Threat Assessment Center. And that is so critical, so you're getting funding for programs to help prevent harm. And that's the bottom line, is how can we get ahead of our objective is to prevent an event from happening in the first place, any sort of harm, and that, having the early intervention. But let's go back to the whole, we're talking about now all these different grant funding sources, taking it outside of DOJ, because I wasn't aware of looking, again, DOD and USDA and Secret Service. I never would have thought of that. Danielle, what are some other models for funding outside of grants?
Yeah, so I have seen success with kind of filling the gaps with local-based funding as well. When you think about it, all of our schools are communities, and those communities have local stakeholders, whether that be nonprofit organizations, the local business community, obviously the teachers and staff, and looking at funding as kind of a siloed mechanism where we have business administrators and CFOs and grant writers and PTOs and booster clubs and foundations and all these different people doing different pieces of, supporting those kids and those teachers. What if we looked at this holistically and got those groups together and said, hey, what are these real challenges? And when we talk about safety, it affects entire communities. It's not just, a kid in a classroom or a teacher here or there. It's everybody. So kind of breaking down those silos and looking at it from a community-wide perspective can be incredibly impactful. And it can scale very quickly because those local resources, those nonprofits, those local businesses, they're already supporting the school likely. Typically they get asked for, hey, our baseball team needs, new jerseys, right? or, we need to be able to fund continuing education for our teachers, whatever those things are, those are impactful and important. But what if we looked at safety that way, and we looked at this across those multiple organizations, those different groups, and created more of a strategic plan? Those local businesses, they can relate. It's their kids, it's their, brothers, sisters, wives, husbands, in the schools, and they, are asking for ways to take responsibility for that. So that would be my recommendation. I think there are some organizations out there that have recognized this funding challenge as a business, and they are willing to support schools and create programs to give back to their local communities. The bottom line is schools aren't the same as for-profit businesses, and they shouldn't be treated that way. And if we flip the model upside down, where those local stakeholders are supporting schools, we can make a big impact really fast. So fill those gaps, outside of federal, state funding, all the things that Christine and Lynette are talking about, and kind of fill in those gaps with that local funding too, I think can be a big deal.
And we, one of the recurring themes that we have in our discussions is that safety is a community responsibility. We're talking about funding. Funding is one aspect. Next month, we're talking about prevention programs. It is a community responsibility and engage in the community. What's interesting, Chief Talley, hey Val, he asked the question earlier about the funding cutoff, but last month we were talking about vulnerability assessment. So can you imagine, if a school district or a school presents the school board or the public, hey, we did an assessment of our risks and vulnerabilities. We've identified these gaps. We need to secure our schools because we need cameras. We need to upgrade our door locking mechanism, or whatever that is, starting with the basics. What are the priorities and getting community support? So whether it's federal grants, state grants, or local support, if you can identify, hey, we've identified these gaps in our vulnerabilities and our security, would you please help in securing our school by funding these programs? Because there's funding out there. It depends on what the priority is. So Chris, I'm going to ask you, kind of diving a little bit deeper in the weeds here. So what are some effective strategies for writing grants to really stand out to folks like Lynette in the COPS office when reviewing grants? Like what would you say are some key strategies there? And maybe Lynette could help us with that one too.
Yeah.
Ash.
And
Let's hear your
Lynette's
first.
probably going to say, I'm sure, Lynette, you and I are going to be on the same page with this. First things first, make sure you're eligible for that specific funding opportunity. Second thing is, if you're not eligible, find a partner who can be the lead applicant and submit the grant on your behalf. And of course, work with them to write. Second thing I recommend, read the instructions. Follow the instructions. This is not a time in a grant application to put in your own information that is not germane to what you're applying for. So give them what they're asking for, be specific, bring your evidence, bring your data, answer the questions fully. If you have questions and you're unclear on how to answer something, of course, attend all the webinars if they have them. Contact the program officer if they're not going into like a dark mode where they can't answer questions. So be aware of that. The other thing is think about your timelines. No good comes from a grant that's due tomorrow that you think you're going to apply for today out of nowhere. So grants are a long game. And there is an immense amount of strategic planning and collecting of data and pulling the community together. Maybe you're doing a needs assessment. Maybe there's all sorts of resources and commitments from partners that you have to pull in. And that takes a long time to put together. And when I say long time, I'm talking no less than 90 days. Best case scenario, if you know the funding opportunity is going to come out, and it's been out historically in the past, but you don't want to do something, just because the funding opportunity came out. Let's say it comes out June 1st, and you think that you're going to be able to get all the signatures and documentation and supporting evidence and turn it around by July 1st. That may not be a realistic achievement. You really need to think strategically about this. Don't be afraid to ask questions, but most importantly, answer the questions, read the directions, and give the information that they're asking for. Don't give them more than what they're asking for. I'll stop there. There's so much more I could go on about that.
Danielle,
I have a,
comment.
yeah, I have a question for Lynette. I have talked to a couple of schools that have received, fantastic opportunities with your group, and that's excellent. I've seen some other situations where maybe the instructions weren't read quite thoroughly. What happens if a school applies for the SBPP opportunity and they are above that, dollar amount that you've set out as part of that grant?
So for anyone who hasn't been on the site, our cap we've set at 500,000, and we've kind of determined that that's a number that can help, smaller districts in a huge way, but also maybe make, some guys with a larger district, so that's our cap. And so, we try to fund as much of your project as possible with that cap. But it just depends. We've had to scale some back before to meet that cap. But it really just depends. What we do not do is, if it's gonna cripple your project, we take that into account as well. So, it just depends on the application, but we have seen situations where coming far above, and unfortunately we can only give so much, but we try to give you a complete or as close to complete project as possible. I wanted to talk about what Christine mentioned, and I almost feel like Christine and I have talked before, because she said everything that I would tell anyone that calls or that sees me at a conference. We've actually streamlined our application so much. It used to be a 12-page narrative, and we were finding that there were applicants who were forgetting to attach those, which, obviously completely wrecks your application. So we've streamlined it to where, we're asked, just tell us exactly this. Give us exactly this data. And as Christine mentioned, our application doesn't change that much. So if you applied last year, you kind of know what we're asking for, your incident data, your percentage of schools that have ID scanners, things like that, that kind of data. It may take you some time to gather. So please don't wait a week before. Chances are it won't happen. So everything Christine said would apply to the COPS office. Lastly, and then I'll be quiet. Our funding is actually shared with the Bureau of Justice Assistance. They are another component of DOJ. And so we share that funding. And unfortunately, there are cases every year where we have to fund different things. That's congressionally mandated, where I'll get an application that was meant for them and, completely knocks you out. Whereas it probably would have been a perfect project that, they don't have a cap. So they would have been able to fund. So it's definitely imperative that you look at your eligibility, look at the requirements, and, make sure you're applying to the right place, because we all have different eligibility, but we all have to also stick with what is, what we're authorized to do, so that we don't, get in trouble on the back end for stepping outside of Congress's wishes. So everything Christine said is completely accurate.
Oh, well, that's reassuring. No, Lynette, just real quick before you unmute. So is the funding you mentioned, the $500,000 cap, is that district wide, or can schools apply for funding individually, or does it have to be district wide?
That is extremely important. Extremely important. Our funding, if a school wants to apply, it has to be at the district level. That is in our, how the program levels above me was determined. It has to be district level. No, unfortunately, individual schools cannot apply. Now, I did mention BJA, Bureau of Justice Assistance, has the other part of the stock funding. Their eligibility is different, so individual schools can apply through them. But for COPS, it is district level. It is Board of Education level. It's now just, it's a higher level where more than one school is meant to be the recipient of the, technology or equipment or anything that you request.
And a point that Chris made earlier, Lynette, right back at you again. So can Chris pick up the phone? Hey, Lynette, I've got some questions about this grant. I mean, what is that? What you mentioned, Chris, is like there's like a dark period or something like that.
Well, some agencies have that. Not every single one does. So if a solicitation is out, there may be, and I will say this, Department of Defense is notorious for that. They will go dark X number of weeks or days. There's like a Q&A window period when you can ask questions. And then once you hit that window, they will not ask anything else. They're focused on receiving the applications. And that can be a week, could be a month before the deadline. So be aware of that. Not every agency operates the same way. Some have that Q&A window, and then after that window, that's it. You can't talk to them about that solicitation. Now you can talk to them about other solicitations, just not that one that's open right now that has a due date pending.
And so Lynette, for your program, is there a period like that, or what does the communication line look like for the COPS office for this particular grant?
So if you reach out to our office and you have a question that our customer service can't answer, they're going to send it directly to me. They send most questions to me. If you've emailed us about school safety, it's me that you've been talking to. So we are open communication in terms of helping you get your application in on time, and with what we're asking for from the time we open to the last second that we close. So we are open. Give us a call. Now, while we won't preview or edit your application for you, we can help you determine is this something that we can support at the COPS office. So definitely reach out to us. If you get off this call and you're thinking of applying, reach out. It'll probably be me, and I'll be happy to help you get through the next little less than a month of the application season. So.
Okay, time to start cramming if you haven't started the process yet. So Danielle, when it comes to prioritizing safety spending, what kind of guidance would you recommend? So if you've got a limited budget, let's say that you secured a grant for, let's say, 50,000, 100,000 for the district. How do you recommend prioritizing? What should be focused on initially?
I would go back to that that team that you've created of those, those stakeholders, your safety team, and really take a look at your needs, the impact to the kids and teachers. And it sounds really simple, but it's really easy to get distracted with what neighboring school districts are doing, with what you saw at, an event that you attended, looking at all of these. There's a lot out there, and just staying rooted in, really what the challenges are within your district and solving for those. And again, looking to supplement and fill those gaps with more of the local, the local approach. And if you don't have any idea how to launch that, even just starting that conversation with that group of people, hey, what could we do in our community? What would this look like? And what programs are out there that could support this? So that would be my advice. Buy-in is incredibly important. I know we had a question about that too, and how to create that. But that's all part of that, establishing that core, and really ensure that you're solving problems, not just looking at what's out there.
Well, and that's the thing. And what's happening now is you have vendors, calling on school districts, superintendents and school just buy this. And you've got vendors lobbying at the state level to fund products specifically, but it's not tied to a vulnerability assessment, right? And so, Lynette, I mean, do you require like an assessment, like here are the vulnerabilities that we've identified, or hey, we love this product. We had an awesome pitch last week. We want to buy this. Like, how does that work? How do you decide what to fund or what not to fund?
So first, want to make sure everyone understands we don't endorse any vendors. We don't recommend any vendors if they, we don't give them your information. If they email us anything, we don't do that. We don't get involved in those relationships. One thing we do suggest is there are free resources for assessments, vulnerability assessments that you can participate in with your local fire department, your police department, to help you identify those vulnerabilities. I know you can pay for those, but we understand that every district has different budgets. We don't want a smaller district to be at a disadvantage because they don't have the budget of, a district with 100 schools or something. So we do suggest go the free route. The Readiness and Emergency Management Center through Homeland Security, it's RAMS for short. They have mobile apps you can download, and we accept those results. You are required to have assessments for all of the schools that you include in your project by the end of any funding you get from us. And we accept, the free resource, the free assessment that you've done on your phone with your local law enforcement. So we do encourage, leverage those resources as well. We don't get into the vendor discussion because we leave that to you, but there are, and I can type in the chat the website for RAMS, but there are so many free federal resources. Education has, they have a community of practice, I think they just started recently, and it's for, thank you, Mary, it's for school districts, communities, and all, free resources, but you interact with your peers across the country. I'm not trying to, talk against vendors or anything, but we have to be careful kind of pushing anyone in any direction outside of the federal space in that regard. So definitely take advantage of your free resources through the link that Mary posted, and, work with that, and then see how you can maximize whatever funding you request from us, so that the assessment part maybe doesn't cut into what your funding is.
Exactly. And on the note of vendors, one of the things that we advocate with Zero Now is local control for determining what you need, what vendor is the best fit, because one of the core things is interoperability. You need to make sure that your technologies, your training, whatever it is, works together, and leaving that up to the local district based on their unique needs, their unique environment, allowing for that local control of where those funds are going to. And Danielle, so you brought this up before, so let's talk about, so how do you build support for us? How do you create that buy-in for support funding your school safety programs?
Yeah. So a grassroots approach is what we've seen be most successful. Again, starting in the classroom with our kids, our teachers, really identifying the challenges there, and not just, but kind of bringing that to light in terms of the real challenges that are happening to administration, not just with, hey, we have this problem, but hey, here's a challenge, and here's how I think that we can come together to start to make a difference and improve the situation. With that type of grassroots buy-in from parents, from teachers, it makes it really tough for anyone in administration to ignore it or look away. it at least gets the conversation started. So I would definitely recommend that approach. I've definitely seen some other approaches where it's kind of, we're coming to the board meetings and we're going to raise this issue, but we have no solutions. That tends to go in the opposite direction. So if you are finding that buy-in to be a challenge, I wouldn't hesitate to involve, even if it's your local PTO, PTA, they're going to be super helpful. And they can also be resources for the prevention piece, because the more that they're aware and looped in to what the challenges are, what the priorities are, that can be supported outside of, the 8 to 10 hours our kids are at school for the day, which can also be impactful.
Exactly. Go back to that.
Yeah.
It goes back to that whole theme of, it takes a community, right? This is a community effort. You're in your community. And I think that's, I'm not gonna go on a soapbox here, but I think that is one of the things that I think, we just need to really emphasize and get back into. I know everyone lives in their own world and isolated in their own spheres, but this is absolutely critical. I can't believe we only have about 20 minutes left, so we're going to take some. We had a ton of questions that came in from participants when they registered. But if you're a live participant, please ask a question in the Q&A. We'll answer those in a second. Let's take Michaela's question here. This one would be for Lynette. Are Arizona charter schools eligible for the COPS grant, or only public schools? So yeah, great question. Charter schools, private schools, or public schools, or all of the above?
So SVPP's eligibility is state, local, tribal governments and their agencies. So that's public school districts, that's boards of public boards of education, and public charter school districts. This is our second year with charter schools being eligible. So yes, charter school, we do check you for eligibility, but in general, a public charter school district is eligible. Individual schools and private schools, unfortunately, are not eligible directly. You would have to have your local law enforcement apply, and you sign on as a partner. And so that may or may not be difficult depending on your relationship with them. But unfortunately for SVPP, it has to go through your local law enforcement if you are a single school or private school.
Now, I'm not sure if either of you know this, but if you're a private school, I believe that they're eligible for the nonprofit security grant program, which is a separate program. I'm not sure which agency that is managed under, but the nonprofit security grant program is one that's available for private schools, charter schools, any nonprofit essentially. And that's something I did not know 2 years ago. So, okay.
And that I just want to say that harkens back to what Christine was saying. If you start at grants.gov and you're a private school, you can filter by all of that to see what's out there for you, because there are resources and grants for private schools. Unfortunately, SVPP currently isn't one, but they are out there.
They're out there, and that's part of navigating this journey, this path, right? I mean, like, the stuff is out there, but if you don't, we always go back to the phrase, you don't know what you don't know. And unfortunately, a lot of folks in administration don't know what they don't know, and that's not their fault. But a lot has happened the last couple of years where safety and security has always been a priority, but now it's really a priority. I think parents and students, I mean, unfortunately, most kids, talk about violence, the number one concern that most students have is violence in school, which is horrible. And our goal is, it's probably going to be a generational thing, but I hope, my grandkids will go to school and feel safe. They don't think, they're not thinking, wow, I hope something bad doesn't happen to school today, that it's a safe environment. So, Chris, question for you here. This is from Stuart Hallett. He asked, so if we don't have a dedicated grant writer, are there outside resources available? And let me ask you before that, I'm going to piggyback on the question. Do you need a professional grant writer in order to apply for grants?
You don't necessarily need a professional grant writer, but I will say this. if you don't have the capacity to prepare the grant and make sure all the forms are complete and put the budget together, and if you haven't done it in the past, you may need a professional to do that. I would advise you on some things. It is a service. Make sure that you have the capacity to pay for the service. Most, if not all, federal and state funding prevent you from paying for services rendered prior to the grant award. There is sometimes a window, it's like 90 days, but that is well before any grant decision making happens. I'd recommend checking the National Association of Grant Professionals, GPA. There's a directory, you can find one locally, but I would advise you, not all grant writers specialize in school violence prevention in any shape or form. Some focus on teacher professional development, some specialize in working with grassroots organizations. So really check the background of your grant writer if you're going to work with them. And those are my bigger recommendations for you surrounding the grant, selecting one if you do need to work with them.
Got it. Got it. No, thank you, Chris. Yeah, we had a question here, another question about buy-in. So let's see here. Okay, Chris, you might be able to answer this one here too. This one's anonymous. So what does it cost for, do you pay a grant writer once a grant has been, like, what's the business for grant writing?
The business, here's the business. So I would anticipate, depending on your state's regulations, signing an NDA with that grant writer. Some want it, some don't. So you may want it because you're going to be talking about a lot of things going on in your school. Not that your grant writer will do something unscrupulous, but just, for safety, making sure nothing gets out that shouldn't be getting out. So there's that. The second thing is you want a service agreement in place. I would anticipate paying a deposit for service, and then the remaining balance would be due upon, when the grant is submitted to the agency or the due date, whichever comes first. Some grant writers charge by the hour. Some charge flat fees. All of them are going to be different. I would expect if you're paying a really talented grant writer, anywhere between $75 an hour to well over $200 an hour. And it sounds like a lot, but when you're talking about potentially millions of dollars, the ROI is there for that. And so there's that. So that could be an hourly rate, or you may be paying a flat fee. I would expect to pay anywhere between $5,000 to well over $10,000 per grant. Again, it depends upon the work that you're going to ask them to do. If they're just writing the narrative versus all of the ancillary documentation and the budget justification and uploading it into the platform. So there's a whole bunch of things that are involved with that process. Just depends on what's involved and what you need and the type of support that you would need from a grant writer.
That's a great question, because that's obviously, I think a lot of people are wondering, like, well, what does it cost? How does it work? Do they get paid? Do you pay a grant writer before, after, all that fun stuff? So that's great.
Yeah, federal regulations and state regulations, if there's dollars coming from the government, they absolutely cannot be paid out of the grant. So that's a no-no. That is like a violation of federal regulations and state regulations. That there's a whole thing about that. If they're members of the Grant Professional Association, there's a code of conduct, and ethical requirements, even if they're part of the American Fundraising Professional Association. So there's a lot of things that they can do for you, but when it comes to service, paying for that service, it's fee for service. And they cannot, and I want to frame this so that everyone hears this. No grant writer can promise, imply, or guarantee that you will be funded. They will do everything that they can to get you in front of the reviewers and have the reviewers take you seriously, but they cannot control the outcome of the grant. So any grant writer saying to you, yeah, we guarantee results or we guarantee success, red flag, right away, red flag. I wouldn't even work with an individual that uses that type of framing language. You want someone who's focused on a strategic plan, who's pulling in relevant and useful data, and is working to maybe that particular grant doesn't get funded, but it is a springboard for other funding opportunities. And the language in there can be springboarded into other potential applications. So the work does not go lost in vain or anything like that. But be aware of that, when it comes to working with a professional.
Oh man, I got to delete that email from Crazy Eddie's grant writing service. Guaranteed grants. Click here to schedule a meeting tomorrow.
Yeah,
Darn.
big grant warehouse. Get one,
Yeah.
buy one, get one. Yeah.
Buy one, get one grant free. Really, Lynette, on that note though, so what about grant management? So after a grant is awarded, can an individual manage the RFP process to ensure? And Daniel, I'm going to hop over to you in a minute about vendors and all that. But as far as grant management after a grant is awarded, because most school districts don't have that expertise, especially on the security side. So can that be funded?
Yes, so one of our, we do fund certain civilian positions, and we do fund contracts depending on what, the link to SVPP. But we have every year, part of projects are having someone to manage the award, to do the reports, to make sure the award conditions are being met, get the reimbursements, all of that. So that is something after, or that you can request and, pay that individual after. But as Christine said, we would not pay anything prior to, but you can hire a grant manager, let's say. And it could even be someone already on staff. It doesn't have to be a brand new employee. If it's someone who you already, know and trust, or who has done this before, we can supplement what they're already getting paid through SVPP to manage the award.
Got it. Chris.
And I want to add to that and say there's a difference between grant management and managing the dollars and some of the reporting and compliance. But also keep in mind, there may be more evaluation, measuring your outcomes and data collection and demonstrating, did you do what you said you were going to do with the dollars awarded? And there may be a heavy need for data collection. That would involve a project or a program evaluator. And that individual, unless it may be specifically required in a funding solicitation, you may see language about like evaluation, how are you going to measure outcomes? That should be your cue that you need an evaluator. Your evaluator should be at the table while the grant is written, because the evaluator can help with strategic planning, putting together your theory of change or logic models. They can help write goals and objectives and take some things off the plate of a grant writer, not all things. They can be baked in to post-award because they're going to do the bulk of their work post-award, and they're going to help with annual reporting or whatever the reporting timelines are and data collection. Evaluators are typically contractors, and they typically are not affiliated with a school district or an institution. Once in a blue moon, some institutions have internal eval staff. That's okay too. But just keep in mind, you have your grant management office, and then there's also the eval office or person who's going to be collecting data and helping with that element as well.
Awesome. Great insights. Yeah, once again, learning a lot here. So Danielle, let's talk. Somebody asked earlier, but we'll talk about vendors in a second if we have time, but from your experience, can you share a success story about, school is able to secure funding? And I know you work a lot with the local community where they've been able to impact their school safety and security. Is there a story you could share with us?
Yes, I would love to. Yeah. Kind of looking back at that community approach, right? We can bring in federal and state dollars as well, but, ensuring that we're filling the gaps with that local funding. We've had exciting stories from schools that have launched, think about a traditional booster club, right? Where, you've got some local business members that are contributing, they're donating either their time or resources to a specific need. But what if we created a digital booster club that was supporting safe and sound classrooms? And we have seen this take off very quickly in school districts. And I can give you an example of one that's not too far from where I am right now in Ohio, that just launched this about 6 months ago. And they are already up into the tens of thousands at this point. It's definitely building those local businesses. Essentially, they have an opportunity to participate, and they get recognized for doing that digitally. So if you know the donation model, you know the booster model, you know, those businesses might be listed somewhere in a physical, you know, a banner somewhere, or a basketball program with, you know, their branding on it. But kind of looking at widening that out, those school districts can scale very quickly in their local communities. And like I said, one just a couple minutes up the road from me right now is doing a fantastic job with getting that off the ground. So, but they did do that planning on the front end of really getting all those stakeholders together, understanding the needs, and pulling together those resources to do that. So it can be done.
It can be done. Well, exactly.
It
Well,
can be done.
thinking outside the box, you know, it's not just, you know, one thing. It's not all only federal funding, only state funding, but also look at your local community. I think that's important. We have maybe for one more question. So James from City of Bentley, Kansas. Lynette, I'll direct this to you. I don't know if this is a loaded question or not, but so what is the easiest federal grant to apply for and secure funding for? Are there any really easy grants? Like, how would you? Yes, Chris, you're shaking your head. No.
I don't, unfortunately, sir, I'm sorry. I wouldn't say easy. They're all competitive. They're all designed to be competitive because the funding is limited. So everyone is looking for the best projects that support whatever the appropriation is. So, but grants.gov, again, go there, and you know, some may have more requirements than others. So you can think of it that way. There may be, I don't want it to sound the way it might come out, but there may be less you have to gather for certain ones. So don't think of it as easier, just the requirements may be different. I don't, yeah, grants.gov will give you a starting point, start filtering by what you're looking for more specifically, and then take it from there. They're all competitive though. Education is a good start for sure for schools specifically, because for our program, you're also competing against sheriff's offices and you know, police departments. So maybe limiting to educational agencies might help, but grants.gov can help filter that down a bit.
Oh man, so no crazy Eddie easy button on that one.
Sorry.
I want to chime in on that. When you go into grants.gov, one of the things, and I believe it's still there, I know grants.gov moved around some of how you search a little bit. They'll tell you some funding opportunities will say how many they anticipate awarding. So there's a difference between a funding opportunity that's going to award 200 nationwide versus 200 in your state. Keep that in mind. Like, there's a difference in the level of competitiveness. They still require a high level of documentation and bringing your evidence and going through and getting stakeholder involvement. But as far as like their decision-making process, there's nothing easy about it. It's, you know, government takes a long time. It's not fast. It's not a quick solution. Most agencies can take anywhere from 6 weeks to 6 months. Some agencies are notorious at taking 6 months to make a decision, and they put that all over their website. Well, some agencies are quicker, but you have to keep that in mind. Like, to think about your timeline, you have to think about the turnaround time on decision making. There's so much involved with that. But Lynette's right. Each of them have their own different level of competitiveness. I wouldn't say easy by any means.
Hey, thanks for bursting that bubble. That's good to know. And I think it's important because once again, I keep talking about this journey, right? We're all going down this path of safer schools, and it's great. This is great. These are great insights to share with our school administrators, who may not have this clarity that we have, right? We talk about optimism. This is about optimism, be able to see the future and then have confidence to get there. So before we wrap things up, because we're over time here, but Danielle, final thoughts and words of wisdom for our participants.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of the last thing that I know we've talked about funding a lot, but really looking at what a true partner looks like, I think is really important. You know, and that partner having a shared vision, and that vision centered around help is really important. Oftentimes that doesn't look like somebody selling you something. It looks like somebody that's a credible resource, that's a connector. And, you know, they are, you know, they have knowledge. They know where those resources are. And oftentimes it's not, you know, somebody selling you something. You know, so just kind of think about that as you're going through this and looking at various platforms. And I would also recommend really digging into the kind of onboarding and training resources from those partners. You know, that it's not just, we know that resources are strained in every single school district. It's tough to get that buy-in and, you know, adopt solutions, whatever they may be. So asking the right questions around what does that ongoing support look like, and onboarding and training from anybody that you're looking to partner with, I think is also incredibly important. So those are my final thoughts. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Danielle. Appreciate the insights. Lynette, final thoughts, words of wisdom for our participants.
I guess I would say just think outside the box sometimes when you're looking around. You'll find an opportunity where you least expect it, and don't be afraid to reach out to that agency or whomever. Just ask the question and get conversations started. Take advantage of what's free for you, so that you know what you need without maybe investing too much on the front end. I hope it's okay to mention, but I'm actually doing an in-house webinar tomorrow for SVPP to talk about the funding. I can drop the link to our page in the chat, and you'll see the registration link there. If you have questions about that program and you're thinking of applying, please join. But, you know, across the federal government, there are opportunities. Just go look for them, ask around, take advantage of the free panels such as this where you can meet others and, you know, start there. And I just want to say, what Danielle was saying, we also look for strong partnerships with your community, with your families. We require that in our application. So it's not just getting the equipment, it's how does your community feel about what you're trying to do? So keep all of that in mind, would be my advice.
You're a very popular person, Lynette. We get a bunch of questions. Where's your email address? Make sure you tune in tomorrow to see Lynette tomorrow. And we'll post it in the Zero Now community, make sure everyone is aware of that. So thank you very much, Lynette. Christine, final thoughts and words of wisdom for our participants.
So I'm going to show my age. So if we remember Saturday morning cartoons, and Tony the Tiger would say, great, but part of your complete breakfast, grants are part of your, they're not the sole source of funding. They are part of your complete breakfast. So think about, diversifying your revenue, however, to support what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And that may come through different avenues and different streams. Grants don't have to be the source. They can be. There's no guarantee that they'll come in. But I would say, look at different revenue streams and, diversify that. Don't be solely dependent upon a grant opportunity.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Christine. Thank you, Lynette. Thank you, Danielle. Learned a lot today. Hopefully this was insightful for our participants. Want to remind everyone that next month, the 18th of June at 2 p.m., we're talking about prevention. How do we prevent harm using some of the funding that comes in, whether it's local funding, grant funding, federal, state, local. There are a lot of things that don't cost any money. Crazy, a little secret there. Things that can be done that you can implement, cultural things within a school. So we're going to talk about that next month. And just remind folks, if you go to the community after this, give us about 30 minutes, We have some of the questions that came in that we were not able to answer. We'll also have Lynette's email address, if that's okay to post in there, and a link to the webinar tomorrow. So thank you, everybody. Thanks, Chris, Lynette, and Danielle. See y'all soon. Stay safe.